Boom, and we're live. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Men with Purpose. Today, I'm joined by our brother, Brett Fleisher. He's the founder of Yummy Heart. At Yummy Heart, Brett utilizes pranayama and somatic techniques to help release traumatic imprints from the body. So apart from being a somatic release educator, Brett is also a filmmaker, an actor, a reiki practitioner, a youth educator, a men's work facilitator, amongst many other things. As you can see, he's a man of many talents. With that being said, Brett, thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you so much, man. That might have been one of my best accented introductions I've ever had.
Okay.
Maybe it's just because I don't hear my name often in Bulgarian, like in a Bulgarian accent.
Accent, yeah, Eastern Europeans.
I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that very much.
I appreciate it, sir. All right. Normally, I like to start these podcasts, apart from smiling and laughing and giggling, with just taking a deep breath and doing a quick check-in, whatever is present for you right now.
Is that my invitation to check in?
Yeah, by all means, yeah. Start.
Yeah, the word coming up for me is silly, man. I'm feeling silly. I'm feeling playful. The can of worms opened up for me last night, where, just like that goofy, giddy, silly, like really childlike, wanting to play and laugh out loud hysterically is coming through. So I'm riding that wave.
Touche to that. I'm feeling curious listening to this right now, but I'm also feeling incredibly grateful. Every single time I sit down and have a guest opposite me and we dive into, I'm like, wow, I wonder what's gonna happen and how grateful I am to have this, even though we're like thousands of miles apart. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, man, this is exciting for me because this is my first time meeting you. So it really is
There we go.
Brand new canvas
to
play with.
It goes both ways.
Yeah.
So I've mentioned you seem to be wearing a lot of hats. You've been kind of working in many different fields. Can we perhaps start a little bit with your backstory? What was the younger Brett like growing up, and how did you find men's work and all the other plethora of things that you've been dipping in and out?
It's so funny because when you said that, I immediately interpreted it literally. I was like, oh yeah, I am. Like I thought maybe I was wearing more than one hat on my head when you said that. I thought about wearing a hat, and it's a little cold out here. I thought you were going to ask me about the weather and where I'm from, and then I realized I'm not wearing any hats at the moment.
Metaphorical, yeah.
I'm sure it's probably metaphorical as well. I mean, I feel like there's so many places I can start. I guess like when I've worked with men, one of the things I hear most is a lack of purpose, or like not an understanding of what their purpose in life is. And it's really that led me to ask myself, like, when did I feel like I knew what my purpose in life was? And I realized for me, it was maybe 2 years old. Because the thing that I ended up pursuing and following was the thing that I did naturally growing up. And I think I always lead men to ask me, what was that thing that you did as a child that you could do for hours and hours and hours and hours without thinking about it? It just like filled you up. And so for me, it was playing different roles. Like I love playing sports. It's funny because you talk about wearing the many different hats, but what I would do at 2, 3, 4 years old is if everyone was outside playing soccer or football, I guess in the East, I would run upstairs and I would change my outfit to be like professional soccer guy. And then I'd run outside and everyone would be switching over to American football. And I would run upstairs and I put on the helmet and the shoulder pads and I would like always be playing the role of the like fully embodied in the role. And so at about age 11, I started pursuing acting professionally because it came so naturally to me to want to experience different people. And really, it wasn't even the external, like me in retrospect, trying to be other people. It was me living out the different dynamics of myself, like wanting to experience what that version of me was, like honing what that skill set was. And I'm always really drawn to sports because I think I loved learning the different motor functions and the techniques and getting really specific with it. So I pursued acting for pretty much my entire childhood and adult life. And I would say it was in, and I refused to take any classes. I didn't want to be told how to do it. I think I was always kind of like flying by the seat of my pants and wanting to just express and experience. I think I was a bit stubborn too. I mean, I'm a Capricorn, so there's goat energy. But I also just loved to play and to do it. And it wasn't until I think I was 20 that I had my first real mentor and teacher. And I learned the technique of acting, which comes from the Russians. And the foundation of that technique is relaxation, learning how to relax the body. And that was the first time I really started investigating my body in a different way. And when I started to relax, I began to open up certain emotional centers in my body that were really blocked throughout my teenage years. And I started weeping. I mean, I spent, I think, 2 years crying. And I think that really opened up the gateway without realizing at the time that I was doing the personal development work. I was really, beginning the integration process, the healing process at that time. And then it was probably actually about a year after that, I took my first yoga class and probably experienced that at 21, physically for many years, just a physical practice of yoga. And then probably 5 or 6 years later, began deepening my investment into different modalities and technologies, how to work with my body. And a lot of that journey was around physical wellness and getting sick at around 23, having mononucleosis and chronic fatigue syndrome and having my whole immune system crash. And then spending my 20s and early 30s searching for health and wholeness in my body that I felt was gone. And I mean, I can speak so deep into that journey, but that journey has obviously led me to so much of the practices and the service that I'm now doing. So there's like a lot of different pieces, but yeah.
Wow. I wanna dive into something that you said about, kind of maybe rejecting a little bit like specific like rules and, maybe how to say authority, but then meeting a mentor. Could you describe a little bit the importance of that for a young man, having someone that can kind of guide you a little bit in?
Well, okay, so I'll go back actually 2 years. Because when I met my mentor, my acting coach, when I was 20, 2 years before that, I was at the request of my parents taken to a therapist that was going through a lot of internal turmoil and emotional dysregulation, and there was certain experiences and certain emotions that I really swallowed in and that I refused to talk about. It was causing a lot of, I think, both internal pain and within my family dynamic, a lot of strife between family members. So they took me to see a therapist, and it was a man probably in his late 30s at the time, early 40s, and talking. He was the first guy to really listen to me and not to judge me, and to acknowledge my sensitivity as an instrument. And it was the first place I felt safe to talk about what was going on with me. And I often talk about him as saving my life. I talk about that experience and him providing that container as in a professional setting, obviously, of meeting me where I was at and listening to me was, it was life altering, because it allowed me to release so much of the pent up experiences. And then at his behest, we invited my dad in, and it was an invitation for my dad to be brought into my experience as well. And that led, to a deeper state of compassion between, and intimacy between my dad and myself. So that was crucial for me. And then, of course, meeting my teacher in the acting work. I think what it was with him specifically is that he had a standard of excellence that I felt was so high, and he didn't compromise his values of excellence in the craft. And that was one of the biggest things I think I learned from him, that I absorbed from him, through osmosis, was if I'm gonna invest myself into this craft, and acting specifically, as is so many art forms, it's all about the commitment of it. Are you in 100%? Are you willing to commit yourself to that thing 100%? And he instilled in me a level of ethics, I think, around working, and making sure that I didn't cut corners, And I think that was really huge for me. I think I was internally driven and ambitious. And so it was this interesting dichotomy of like being driven and having standard of excellence, and yet learning a technique where the whole foundation is relaxation. Because we often think of drive and ambition is like this really kind of fueled, tense, like I got to be on and alert. And this is like, okay, be really focused and yet get completely relaxed in the body. And yeah, that was that took me a long time. That took me years to literally learn how to like bring my shoulders from here down to here, because we hold a lot in our bodies, and that really was, I think, the first introduction to me to body-based modality, a body-based modality or methodology. And it just made so much sense, because I think I was always very connected to the sensations and the experiences in my physical body. So I don't know if that fully answers the question of the value of a mentor. I know for me specifically, it was really crucial. And what's interesting is I ended up having these, not just men, but throughout my life, women, older men and women that have become these guideposts for me. And not also just elders, but those that have possessed wisdom through experience, that have I think it's vital in any, if you look at the hero's journey, right? There's always a moment in the journey where the hero or heroine meets their mentor. And and sometimes it's a physical, being, or sometimes it's a tree, or sometimes it's, something from the cosmic realm, or sometimes it's a part of themselves that they get in touch with. That's a guidance system. And I think, for me, the resistance to it, like I got it on my own. Like I know what to do, I think is definitely I mean, I just hated being told what to do. You know, if my parents said make my bed, I would say absolutely not. But then if no one gave me rules, if there was no like parameters on it, like, oh, well, I'll make my bed because, you know, it'll be a gift. Oh, I'd rather gift it than be like told what to do. So I think that resistance is also like a natural thing. Um, and having a mentor that can break through that resistance is really valuable.
Mm. I mean, I can relate to so many things you said, specifically with the thing with the authority. Like someone tells me something, I'm like, what? Like, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I think drawing, listening to you, I'm kind of drawing my own correlations when I was a teenager and being told what to do. I was like very angry and like, oh, I'm not gonna do that. I'm shouting and yelling and then at some point, I think things also change. Like you said, if you follow kind of this hero's journey, there comes a point where you're going to be left alone on your own, and then someone or something kind of comes in and kind of plays this role where it kind of gives you a little bit of guidance. uh, you mentioned body-based therapies. I don't really want to dive more into that. I've been mentioning this on the podcast multiple times that I've started training in more body-based therapies around bioenergetics. And some people ask me, is it working for you? How is it? And it's very different to describe compared to other, let's say, practices, meditation, like just doing something with the body where you're breathing, maybe vocalizing some of that is something that's very, you have to experience it for yourself. It's difficult to kind of pinpoint exactly how you feel, right? um, can you talk a little bit more about that in the whole kind of psychosomatic relationship, why this is so important, especially now where everybody seems to be really stuck in their heads and thinking out your way out of problems? Doesn't seem to be working very well.
Yeah, I'll I'll start this answering this question with a caveat, which is that I professionally um, guide people in somatic release work. Um, I practice it myself. I've received many sessions. I continue to explore different ways of working with the body and the nervous system specifically. And at the same time, I practice meditation. I think there's great value in talk therapy. I think there's incredible value in journaling, in um, in athletics. You know, I think that for me, finding a balance of different ways of working with the entire system, because we are not just one system, we are a conglomeration of all these different, the endocrine system, the nervous system, the immune system, then we have the physical body, the vital body, the spirit body. I mean, there's so many different ways to work that I really don't believe that there's a way. I do not believe that there is, because I mean, I actually just wrote my list down. I'm beginning to compile my grocery list of every modality of healing that I have done over the last decade. And I think I have 70 different practices, modalities,
Wow.
courses, things that
Wow.
I've done and tried on my own healing journey. And if you were to ask me the effectiveness of like all of them, I would say they all work, you know?
Hmm.
And I think they all work to the degree that you believe in it, that you invest yourself into it.
Hmm.
Um, like I said, that therapist that I saw when I was 18,
Hmm.
by just telling my story for the first time, allowed an emotional release in my body,
Hmm.
and of course a somatic release as well. Um, that was enormous. It was huge. Now, I have learned that the mind the brain is capable of going into certain cyclical patterns of thought. And when we talk about, trauma is a very big little word that we use, and I'm moving further away from the word trauma because it's I think there's such a misconception around it. But what I talk about are imprints. When our body is imprinted by an experience,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a car accident or, an emotional, a really intense emotional experience, um, or perpetual illness or whatever it is. If we use the mind to talk about that experience, there's a way in which we can actually just keep experiencing the same thing over and over and over again by talking about it. And when we have that imprint, it lands, no matter what it is, whether it's psychological, spiritual, physiological, emotional, mental, it's going to land in the body. It's going to manifest its way somewhere in the body. So that if we begin to address it and understand where the energy has been stored in the body, and we begin to recognize the connection between the emotions, the thoughts, and the body, if we release it from the body, we can release the imprint. If we really end up going deep into, I think we can use the body as a way to get to the belief system. And if we can shift the belief system on its fundamental level by accessing the belief through the cellular makeup, through the sensations in the body and the feelings in the body, knowing that those imprints are happening in real time, because memory within our amygdala doesn't actually know the difference between the past and now. So if we can access it now and begin to shift the imprint and shift the belief system, which is generally bringing a level of completion and resolve to an event that was unresolved in the body, that root experience will shift, and then all of the symptoms and the experiences that we have in the body begin to kind of domino effect. So for me, I've seen the depth of what is possible when we literally just pay attention to a sensation in the body, and we track that sensation. Maybe it's a pulsation in the hand, and we track it. And we realize that that pulsation in the hand is connected to some pain in the left shoulder. And when we begin to bring awareness and acceptance to that pain in the left shoulder, some movement happens, and there's a palpitation in the heart. And then as soon as we pay attention to that, a feeling arises, and there's a level of shame. And when we track the shame, all of a sudden it leads us to a memory or an image. And that image leads us to a memory, and that memory leads us to a specific imprint that happened. And that imprint reveals to us some belief that happened at that time, which is, hey, I'm not good enough to be loved. I have to work really hard to be successful in life, whatever that thing is. And I've seen that thread travel very deep into someone's experience in this human form. I've also seen it travel very deep into lineage and very deep into past life experiences. So to me, the body, there's a great book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. And I think it's a wonderful title. Because I think it summarizes what I'm talking about, is that the body has a lot of information in it.
A lot of wisdom.
And a lot of wisdom and a lot of and communication. One of my favorite lines that I share all the time is, the body is the unconscious made manifest. So if the body is the unconscious made manifest, what that means to me is that the body is a signal caller from the states that we are not having full awareness of. So if there's a state of being that we aren't in our unconsciousness, that we don't have full awareness of, the body is that made manifest. So it's the one sending the signals. When we really look at, I have what I associate as pain in my body, if I remove the judgment from what that is and remove the narrative and the story from it, and I tune in to what is being communicated, it's a signpost. And this says, hey, there's something that's misaligned. There's something that's not being addressed and looked at here. So let's look at it. rather than the alternative, which is a lot of times, hey, this thing is really uncomfortable. I have a major judgment on it. So I'm going to do everything I can to avoid it and to make it go away. So I'll take a drug for it, or a surgery on it, or, you know, do anything I can to escape that feeling. And I think so much of the work is learning how to feel. And there's another adage that I absolutely love and use all the time, which is perhaps the journey is not to feel good, but to get good at feeling. And if we can get really good at feeling, and practice getting good at feeling, and honor and accept all of our feelings, that's when we become really vulnerable. That's when like stuff starts to transmute and change, just very naturally.
Like, dude, like my head is exploding right now. First of all, I'm very glad that you brought up this kind of caveat to say there is no silver bullet, not one somatic release therapy or a kind of practice is going to be a one size fits all. I think there is immense, like you said, tremendous value in all of these practices. The Body Keeps the Score, great book. I'm rereading it just because it's so long, B, it's so deep that you have to kind of keep coming back to this. One thing that you said, I never associated the body that everything else is going to come or is going to end up to a particular belief. I thought it's just like, and it's a funny thing, like we carry all these like super sophisticated tools that we call our bodies, yet very few of us take the time to really pay attention to what's actually being communicated, as opposed to, yep, I feel a pain here or something else, I take a pill and then I numb myself. It's a very counterintuitive thing, like the culture, like people getting drugs for like things that perhaps they should work their way through and just kind of understand, okay, what is my body trying to communicate to me, because ultimately that's what it's trying to do. It's really baffling. It only go ahead.
Yeah, I also want to say that by no stretch do I consider myself to be anti-pharmaceutical. You know, and I do not judge myself or anyone who is in a lot of pain and wants to experience relief from it. You know, it's a very human thing to do. It's totally understandable. I think when I look at, I don't know, for me, there's always been an investigation of how do I become the optimal version of myself. And I find that, and understanding like, well, what is the mechanism and how do I work? And if I am, you know, a spirit or a spiritual being housed in a human experience, like how do I develop that relationship, you know, within myself? And for me, it's I've come to learn that if I avoid or neglect anything, it becomes a distortion that gets louder and louder. And I'm citing some language from my dear brother, Kevin Walston, who's also a member of Sacred Sons, who leads his conscious creatorhood. And if you want to dive deep into the mindset of like how to create your own reality and unity consciousness, dive into Kevin's work because it's absolutely brilliant. And I also want to cite here when you mentioned the belief. So I learned the modality that I learned is from a specific teacher, and her name's Judith Johnson. She lives in North Carolina, and she developed her own way of working called psychoneuroenergetics. And psychoneuroenergetics is the psychology, the neurology, the energetics of the body, the mind, the emotions. And it is, I think, her legacy and ingenious work over decades and decades of understanding belief systems and working with belief systems and making that connection between the somatics and the energetics and the belief systems. Where if you look at the work of Peter Levine, who developed somatic experiencing, which is a very beautiful way of working with the physical body, and I think is really effective for impact trauma and molestation, things that are held in the body. It doesn't fully take um, that dive into what the belief systems are.
Mm, mm,
Um, but I highly recommend this reading "Waking the Tiger" by Peter Levine. I mean, he talks about as mammals, how the nervous system functions in the freeze and the fight or flight response. And I think understanding the nervous system is so valuable. And I really credit Judith, who took a lot of work from transactional analysis, and also spiritual based practices. I think there's always an element of a little bit of shamanism in what we do, and
mhm.
um, making space for the potentiality that there's mystery and there's magic at play.
Mm,
And if we can let ourselves go, and uh, the credence of her work is to lovingly and willingly endure all things.
hmm. Wow.
And I initially had a resistance to that sentiment, because I think of endurance as like kind of like a battle, like I gotta endure and like hold strong.
Be
um
stoic and yeah, just gonna take it. Okay.
and yet I've come to understand that if we can lovingly and willingly endure all things, because life is a level of endurance, no matter what experience we are in, if we can endure that experience. And so lovingly is with compassion, and willingly is by choice. So if I, with compassion and by choice, say, hey, I'm going to endure this experience, maybe it's that 30 seconds in that ice cold water that I plunge into in the morning, maybe it's, um, you know, uh, for me that, falling and slipping and experiencing pain,
Mm,
you know, can I endure the pain by lovingly and willingly, choosing to be in that and be really present with it? And then can I lovingly and willingly uh, endure? I think I often experience it as I hold space for people, as people are going through their journeys and experiences. Can I, with compassion and choice, hold the space to listen to someone else's experience and be there for them in it, rather than try to fix it or judge it, or um, or ignore it. Um, and so for me, 90%, I consider 90% of what I do as a practitioner is create safety. I
wow.
think that's the work, create an energetic and physical space of safety where someone can feel. Like I mentioned that therapist did for me, is he allowed me to feel safe to share, and like he didn't have to do anything other than that except ask me a few questions, and I was able to have a cathartic experience. You
Hmm.
know.
I think sometimes people underestimate, and myself included, before I kind of got more serious into this work, of how profound yet how simple it may look from the outside, just to sit down and start sharing how you feel with maybe even a complete stranger. And if they're really there with you, if they're really congruent, if they're really present, then you kind of almost, you go into a different realm where you kind of just you and the other person, and you're like a, in a, like you said, like a container. And yeah, it's very, very, it's difficult to describe it with words. People ask, what is men's work? And you just sit down and talk about feelings, and and it's, I can understand, people can take make fun of it, or maybe because they haven't experienced something like this. But I find it, when you are in that state where you're, like you said in the beginning, and maybe I'm butchering this a little bit, you're trying to be at optimal performance at the same time really relaxing, then you're kind of holding this paradox, and something magical happens.
Yeah, it's the command surrender principle. I'm going to
Command
command
surrender.
you to surrender into it. You know, Bessel van der Kolk talks about one of the biggest, he uses the word, I think, trauma in our society is someone not being seen or heard in their reality. And I think that is so much of what we experience when we get into a men's space or a therapy session, or any safe container, where all of a sudden you will see, the emotional flooding of a lot, of someone that, like I shared in my story, of literally sharing my story and having a huge emotional response because someone was willing to listen and see me in my reality that I had developed shame around, that I felt like it wasn't safe to be seen or heard in that reality. So if we are willing to see somebody and listen to someone where they're at, it can be transformative instantaneously. And then the level of seeing and listening to someone is also contingent on how willing we are ourselves willing to be heard and seen.
Sounds so simple, but easier said than done.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I think that's entirely up to you. I think whether it's easy or challenging is it can be if we make it that way, and it can be also really easy if we allow it to be.
Again, belief systems, right?
Entirely, and the narratives and the stories we put on something, and yeah, and look, I have experienced both. I have gone through
Same here.
where it like to be accepted and to accept myself and to surrender into an experience has felt like absolute torture, and like clawing on and hanging on and fighting and resisting and making it so hard, and then convincing myself that it's such a hard thing to do. And I've also had moments where within the right context, within the right person, or in nature, the ability to just let go and open up and surrender and allow it to go through is just boom. It's effortless effort. It takes nothing.
Something the more podcasts I have, the more conversations I have like this, the word shame keeps popping up over and over and over again. I'm curious to hear your take on this. Why do men, I mean, I don't know, maybe women also have this, but men, because obviously we're talking about men's work, and shame keeps popping up. Why do men hold so much shame or carry so much shame about things? I know it's a big question, but curious to know what you think.
My first thought to this is I'm still learning about this. I'm still investigating what shame is. To me, I don't have. I think there's so many. I think you can look at so many different aspects of it, culturally, historically, chemically, mentally. I think there's so many different ways to discover the roots of shame. And I do think that it is not there's a word I'm looking for. It is not classified to a gender or a type of person. I think shame can affect so many, and I think initially shame comes out of the distortion that there's a right and a wrong. Like, I think first and foremost that if we, play the game of duality-based consciousness where there's good, bad, right, wrong, I think shame is bred out of judgment, first and foremost. Any sort of judgment, which is, if we're told, don't do that, that's not a good thing to do, it's the wrong thing to do. Well, then if I have a desire to do this thing, but I'm told it's wrong, then I'm going to come into conflict, right? I'm going to create a conflict, and I'm going to develop some sort of emotional response that's going to protect me in that experience in some way, or is going to allow me to continue to operate as a human being. So I think that shame is an act of service in a certain way, as all emotions.
Wow.
That shame totally serves us to indicate where we're not being authentic with ourselves. So if I'm, ashamed of my sexual lust and my desire for the physical body, and maybe maybe it's been educated to me that it's appropriate for me to have lust towards that physical body, but that if I'm lusting this over here, then that's a wrong. Then that's the wrong. So then there's a confusion happening, right? So then there's this energy that's coming through of desire, and then there is the stamping of it. I know don't have that, so now I'm in this conflict, right? So that shame. So then, if I develop shame around my sexuality, and I'm ashamed of sexuality, or a common example is, right, men having emotions, crying. I talk about this a lot. There are, I think, the most brilliant technology that we have as humans is the physical body. It's the most ingenious technology we have. We're still thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and we're still learning about it and figuring it out and discovering new nerve endings and new ways that it works. I mean, it's so it's just so magical, the body. And there's all these ingenious mechanisms when we look at the nervous system and how the nervous system operates. But if you look at the release systems, right? We fart and we burp and we sneeze and we cough and we yawn and we expel energy. We expel gas, and there's these releases. And societally, we have developed a construct around what is proper and improper. And so it's not proper to, right? To fart, or it's disgusting. I mean, I think, and then you can kind of look culturally, boys are encouraged to fart more than girls are generally. Girls are encouraged to cry more than boys are generally. Boys are allowed to express their anger more than women are, generally speaking. So if we look just at the biomechanics, and we hold in our farts and we cover our yawns and we hold in our sneeze, right? I've seen so many people that will instead of they're
yeah.
It's literally an implosion in the body. If that energy is not moving outwards, it's then going to move inwards. And that's just physically. So then if we look emotionally, we have mechanisms built in: tears, and sweat, and we cry, And when we rage out, we are moving energy out. We hit because we move things. When we laugh, when we're happy, we laugh, and that's a release of the energy. So if I grow up in a family or a culture, and my joy is threatening to someone, and I hold in the laughter, then that energy is going to move somewhere in the body. And if I grow up in a society where it's not, there's a concept that sadness is weakness, then I'm going to hold in the tears and I'm going to stop it. And literally, like it's a hose, and I'm going to put a crank in the hose. So all that energy is not going to actually go out and release. So I'm holding it, and I'm not burping, and I'm not farting anymore, and I'm not crying, I'm not laughing, but anger is encouraged because, oh, in my family we're allowed to get it. So now I have, energy moving in one direction, and that gets inflated, where all these other experiences and energy, emotions, or energy in motion gets deflated. Yeah, I'm going to develop headaches and stomach aches and back pain and belief system that's going to arise from it's not okay to cry, and I'm weak if I cry. And then eventually I'm going to have gastrointestinal pain, and then that will lead to leaky gut or Crohn's or depression, or chronic anxiety, or Tourette's syndrome, or insomnia, or you fucking name it. And so then if we take medicine, which is, medicine is brilliant. Medicine is brilliant. We've developed things to help this system operate. But if we're taking medicine to address a symptom that was emotional in nature, then we're not actually addressing the emotion. And we're putting, a Band-Aid on a stomach ache. It doesn't make any sense. So that's why when we get into a men's container or a goddess circle or a therapy or a locker room or a sports arena, and we're allowed to have our experience, where can big strong men cry? On the football field. I watch it all the time. They experience a loss, and these 300-pound big motherfucking dudes are crying and weeping, and a lot of them are trying to hide it, but it's like me, it's like their spirit calling an experience so they can have a release. And we will find ways to do it. And if we don't find ways to do it, it will find its own way. It will leak out. And oftentimes it'll leak out without us having command over it. So what I think we learn to do is to develop command by practicing in safe spaces. Right? So when I go into a men's circle and I have an opportunity to look and address and express what I've been ashamed of, what I've held in, and that thing that I've held in, I now get to actually express in a container where it's being held by men that have made the active, willing choice to release judgment and hold a container. Now I get to experience and express what I held in, have the emotional release, and now find a command over, oh, when this comes up, I know I can do this for myself.
Dude, I think I keep saying this every single time I do a podcast, but I never really thought about it that way. How we kind of, I know that maybe intuitively, or just by virtue of reading some books or speaking to men like yourself, men and women like yourself, that suppressing something isn't natural, and that usually comes back to bite you. I was interviewing a gentleman. His name is Kevin Healer. So he was on the podcast. He was opening up about the fact that he was overworking, stressing out, anxiety, and that energy. There wasn't a space to be able to channel that through, and he developed testicular cancer because of that. Perhaps, I mean, that's obviously speculating, but he can kind of, you know, put it back to the fact that he wasn't channeling that energy. He wasn't allowing anything to kind of leak out. So, like you said, the body finds a way to leak, but without our consent, it just kind of comes out.
Well, and I am not an expert on this by any means, but from my basic understanding, when we experience a stressor or stress, hormones are released. Cortisol is released in the body, and literally toxins are released into the body. So on a chemical level, if we look to the east, right, around chi, life force energy, all those practices, tai chi and yoga, are about creating the flow of energy moving throughout the body, where we're releasing blockages from like the energy centers, right, the command centers in the body. And that's why I think that I had such an impacting experience when I began to relax my body for the first time. And like I said, it took me 2 years to where I was like learning how to move my body and look for tension, find different ways. And for 2 years, I was just moving with more tension, convincing myself that I was moving relaxed. And finally, at some point, I remember thinking, sitting in this metal folding chair in a small little theater in New York City, moving my body around, going, I'm like, I don't know, I'm like tired of fighting. I remember having that thought, I'm like, I'm fighting so much to like make things happen. I think like at some point, I remember my mind thinking like, it's like, I'm tired. I remember thinking like, I'm tired. And my shoulder did exactly that. And I remember my teacher going, Brett, your left shoulder, do you know what just happened? And I was like, no. And then, of course, I thought, I went back immediately to that moment, and I had to capture it and record what that was as I like let go of, as I began to surrender, and the body just naturally in accordance went, yeah, like that. And then sure enough, when that happens, emotion will come through, because now, you know, what we're holding, I mean, we can hold, you know, these emotions can get stored in different parts of our body, in the hips, chest, and look at the body language, you know, look at someone that talks to you like this, you know, they're protected, they are holding something here. For a long time. I'm gonna turn my video on. If I was talking to someone, I would notice I would go in this position, like literally creating a
wall,
block on the left side of my body, and I began to pay attention to my body, and go, oh, isn't that interesting? I mean, the crossing of the legs and like squeezing the sexual organs in, right, like, and hiding, and holding that energy, and like you know, beginning to pay attention to, you know, I see this behavior a lot with, you know, with people, or like the different ways in which the body is communicating how it wants to release, or how it wants to hold things. And the more we can just begin to bring awareness to it, right? It always starts there. It has to start with awareness. To begin to bring awareness, and now all of a sudden I'm aware of this behavior. I'm like, oh, now I'm doing it, huh? what am I feeling? Oh,
Hmm.
I'm like really feeling insecure about how I look. So, okay, so I'm doing this when I'm feeling insecure about how I look, or I'm doing this and I want to, you know, when like I find myself doing this a lot. Well, I'm covering my mouth.
Hmm.
Well, what is this about? Oh, I'm feeling like, you know, I don't want to really be heard or whatever it is, whatever,
Hmm.
it's like I said, it's the unconscious made manifest. It's
Hmm.
signaling to us. So can we begin to really start listening to the body?
Hmm. It's
Okay,
so a manifestation, maybe, unconscious manifestation of us preventing to express something, perhaps.
yeah, because it didn't feel safe to do so.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow. And I know we're kind of short for time right now. We're a little bit ahead so let me just jump into kind of the last
Yeah,
question, because I feel like we can go on for at least a few hours.
man, I could do this for days. I love.
Yeah, and I appreciate you lovingly talking to me whilst you're kind of freezing your ass off outside.
Hey, thanks. Keeping me alert.
I appreciate that. Is there something that you wished I would have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, that's a great question. No. Um, in the sense that there wasn't a question uh, in that every question you answered, I think, was led me to new things. So like I guess what I'm interpreting is, you're asking me, is there something that I'd like to talk about that didn't get talked about?
Yeah.
Like a question around like, um, no, man, no. I think you ask great questions.
I always kind of make sure to ask this, because sometimes A, we're a little bit pressed for time. B, I know that, the person across can share so much more wisdom, but if there's something particularly like a burning desire to share something, because sometimes it does come up, I like to kind of honor that and allow, the
Yeah.
guest to kind of get into this a little bit more. But if the answer is no, then I appreciate it too, man.
Uh, I just feel like maybe it hasn't been asked yet, and I don't know what it is, but I'm sure we'll keep talking and it'll come up again.
Sure, we can do a part two for sure. We can do a part two. Um, so if people are drawn to this sort of modality practices, they want to experience somatic therapy or body therapy or every of the other 70 plus practices that you've
Yeah.
experienced, you've done, you've trained with, you facilitate, you help Sacred Sons. Where can they find a little bit more about you and the message, and your message rather?
Cool. I guess the one I just thought of one question
Oh, nice.
um, around uh, the the value of work, the value of working with children, because
Oh man.
that's a big part of what I do, and I think the importance of embodying, you know, embodying the work for ourselves so that we can show up for the younger generations um, in ways in which we can begin to instill, rather than having to like spend years as an adult going into men's circles and releasing the things, instilling the practices and or the space specifically for kids to have their emotional freedom and fluency and feel like they are in containers in which, they don't develop um, those dynamics of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll use that as a segue to talk about where you can find me and the things I do. One of my big passions is uh, working with, and it's not really work for me. So like playing with the youth. And so I've been developing a value-based curriculum online enrichment program with a dear friend of mine. We're called the Phoenix Assembly. We have our own podcast where we um, interview guests specifically right now to our 9 core values, with a specific uh, um, direction to reach parents and educators that work with kids, and we interview people that we feel are embodied in these values. So if you go on Facebook or Instagram, find us at the Phoenix Assembly. If you are a parent and want to get in contact with us, please do so. We are in the process of developing our enrichment program. Our intention is to launch it by the fall of this year, our first 3 values. We've taken 9 values. We partner them with 9 energy centers or chakras in and out of the body. We have 9 categories of learning for each value. We have 9 character guides that are connected to the 9 planets. We include Pluto. So we create our own mythology and storytelling around this. So super excited to launch that. My practice is called the Yummy Heart. You can find me at theyummyheart.com. Happy to share what I know. I do sessions one-on-one as well as workshops. My one-on-one sessions I am doing virtually. I have a select clientele in the Los Angeles area that I do see in person, because a lot of the work I do is a physical body-based modality where I will hold acupressure points and work specifically with someone's body. But there's also ways to work remotely. And there are manual manipulation exercises and point holding that we can do on our own bodies. And yeah, I am teaming up with an organization called the Inner Citizen. You can check them out too, theinnercitizen.com. Her name's Selena. She's developing an incredible resource, a hub for people that are in it, that are looking for modalities, and don't really know where to turn to find like a comprehensive resource list. So I'm teaming up with her, and I will be that list that I have been writing of all of my, I'm currently developing into a journal entry and a blog post where you can take a look at all the different things that I've done and my reviews of each of them and different practitioners that I've worked with. Because I've worked with some really incredible people.
I bet.
Always happy to pass
That's
it along.
amazing. Wow. I'll be sure to check that out myself. I'm just like, super curious as well now. All right, man. Thank you very much for taking the time, sharing your wisdom. I'm glad you brought that point, and it was a question and you kind of answered it a little bit as well about the value of spending time with youth and leading youth, youth-based programs. That is essentially the future of us as a species, if you will. So it is important to spend some more time on that, so we save them a lot of time later in therapy, etc., etc. So important. All right, thank you very much, sir. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Oh man, such a pleasure. I too feel very grateful to be in your presence, and I really appreciate what you're doing and bringing to people, and your enthusiasm and open-heartedness around it. A joy.
Thanks, sir. See you, folks. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode.